And now I'm delighted to welcome to the stage John Ridgeon, the Chief Executive Officer of World Athletics, who's going to give a case study about the World Half Marathon, which they staged this year. How did they do it? It's an impressive feat. John, please tell us all about it.
Well, thank you very much, and very, very good to be invited to speak at this host city conference in Glasgow and give the opportunity to talk about how World Athletics staged the World Half Marathon Championships in Gdynia, Poland, I guess about 6 weeks ago now. Time flies. And I just want to start, though, by saying congratulations to Glasgow for hosting this conference. I know that hosting anything right now is not easy. And I think it once again demonstrates what a kind of make it happen city Glasgow is. So thank you for giving this opportunity. And by the way, I love that shot of Perez Chepchirchir, who won the women's half marathon championships in Gdynia in a new world record. You can see the absolute joy on her face. So right, let me get my clicker up and running and dive into the presentation. So look, the World Half Marathon Championships was the only World Athletics Series Championships that we managed to deliver in 2020. We actually had 3 more planned, but we had to postpone to future years the other 3. But in fact, the World Half Marathon Championships was originally planned for spring of 2020, but we've postponed to the autumn, figuring it would give us more time to plan and time to actually identify mitigating measures, which it absolutely did. So, you know, we delivered the championships. It was a huge success, but in truth, it was far from easy, and it was only possible due to strict COVID-19 protocols that we put in place. But I've got to say, it was certainly worth all of the hard work, because the athletes, when they did make it to Poland, were desperate to compete, desperate to save at least some of their 2020 season, and as a result, the performances of the athletes were absolutely amazing. We had 1 world record from Perez Chepchirchir, as I said, from Kenya in the women's event. We had an area record from Jacob Kiplimo, who won the men's event. We had 2 championship records and 22 national records. So it really was quite a championships in terms of athlete performances. But also, when you look at numbers as well, despite some really challenging travel restrictions that were in place, we still had the second highest number of both athletes and teams that showed up for the championships when you compare it against the last 10 editions of the World Half Marathon Championships, with some 53 member federations in total putting teams in, and a good number of athletes, well over 100 men and women competing, plus 113 officials in terms of individuals. So look, the event was a great success, but only as a result of the measures we put in place to, I guess the expression is, take back control of the competition environment, to give us confidence that we actually could deliver this event successfully and, most importantly, safely. And it was also the result, and I can't emphasize this enough, of a really sort of super cooperative, can-do attitude from the Polish government, the Gdynia LOC, and the Polish Athletic Federation, and most of our member federations as well. So that was a really important element in making this happen. Just trying to change slides here. Oh, we've gone too far. Okay. So look, this was a totally new challenge for World Athletics, as you can imagine, delivering an event against the backdrop of COVID-19. But I've got to say, the COVID-19 protocols that our health and science team set up, and in a moment I'll bring in Stefan Beaumont, who's director of our health and science team, to answer any questions. But the protocol that the team set up was executed well. Look, and it worked. And it was really based on the fact that all the athletes, officials, workforce had to be tested immediately before they came to Poland. And then once they arrived, again, we created a hotel safe bubble where everyone was yet again tested again by our own medical team to make sure that they were clear of COVID, and we could create this safe bubble in which we could stage the championships. And in total, across 2 labs we set up in 2 hotels in Gdynia, we delivered 655 tests over 2 or 3 day period. And this was only possible because we basically purchased our own testing equipment and run ourselves the use of that testing equipment. So it allowed us to be, in full control of our testing procedures. And just so you know, that the procedures we used, and again, Stefan can talk about this later, is called the LAMP system, which, if you want the long name for it, is the care testing system based on the loop-mediated isothermal amplification technique. So I'm sure you'll be happy for me to use the word LAMP throughout this presentation. But what that allowed us to do is our own medical team were able to administer multiple saliva COVID tests, these LAMP tests, and the results coming through in about an hour. And that really allowed us to, as I said, it was the game changer that allowed us to stage this championships. But of course, if you test people, you might get positives, and that's exactly what happened. We actually got, over the week of the championships, 4 positive tests. 2 were from workforce members on the eve of the championships, and then actually 2 athletes post the championships. But again, we knew what to do when we got these positives, because what we'd done is establish before the championships a quarantine procedure and premises, and it worked. So we knew if anyone did test positive, they immediately could go into pre-booked accommodation and work through their quarantine period, and again be tested regularly throughout that period as well. So we had that set up. And I think the last point to re-emphasize is, look, this was again possible because, yes, we set a lot of procedures up with the LOC, but also we had really strong cooperation from the Polish government, the LOC, the member federations, and everybody involved accepted that, yes, we'd taken many mitigating measures, but there still had to be an acceptance there was some risk involved in staging the championships. And once that risk had been accepted, then we could push on and make it happen in, as I said, a safe and controlled way. And just to give you a little more background to the COVID-19 system we set up, there was really a 3-staged process. The first was well in advance of the championships, which was, by the way, on October the 17th. We started by defining clearly the client groups that we needed to be there and we needed to inform in advance of the championships. Then we informed them of all the documents and timeframes required for all that pre-championship documents to be completed. And then once we collected all the individual email addresses, we sent the link to the secured sanitary platform that everybody, and I mean everybody who was involved in Gdynia, needed to fill in advance of travelling to Poland. The next stage was immediately prior to travel. Everybody involved, and again I mean everybody, there was no exceptions here, needed a signed permission form from a doctor, also a medical examination form completed, and a PCR test with the sample taken between 9th and the 14th of October, so literally just in the few days before travel. And these documents had to be downloaded on our secured sanitary platform. And then the final stage was on arrival. Even before checking into the hotel, we had these 2 testing labs we'd set up in 2 key hotels where the majority of people were housed. And on arrival, everyone received their LAMP test to confirm that they were COVID-19 clear. And the results coming back in, as I said, a little over an hour. And then all individuals were given secured access to their results. So that's, in a snapshot, exactly what we set up in order to make the championship possible in Gdynia. So changing slide once more. Look, the championship happened, but making it happen, even though success, was not without its challenges. Irrespective of COVID challenges, we actually had a storm that hit Gdynia in the 2 or 3 days in the build-up to the championships, and actually it caused quite a lot of damage. We had a fire in Seiko's equipment hut, which is our official timer, so that destroyed some essential equipment. And also the weekend of the championship, Gdynia actually went into a red zone COVID rating. So again, it made it even more difficult to stage the event. But parking those problems, which I guess any live event can suffer from time to time, the COVID specific related challenges, I think it included the following. First of all, just everything was so time consuming, from everything that had to be done before the championship to all the testing during the championships, and just how careful everything how careful everyone had to be. So it was a massively time-consuming process. Secondly, it was a period where flights were constantly being cancelled, so we had to be very creative in terms of how we rescheduled and booked teams so they could actually get to Poland to compete in the first place. The Polish government was very cooperative in providing visas, but the travel schedule was very challenging, time-consuming, and also quite a lot of additional cost was incurred as a result. Also, in terms of peak inflows, inevitably at a championship, teams tend to turn up at exactly the same time. So there was some real pressure kind of a couple of days before the championships, where we were, for example, having to get through 90, 100 tests per hour, which put immense pressure on the team, and did at times require a little bit of patience from those being tested. But everyone was certainly saw it in the right spirit, and if they had to, and it was rare, but if they had to, were happy to wait a little bit. Which leads me on to the next point, which, look, the medical team did an amazing job, but in retrospect, we were understaffed. We got through it because the medical team were willing to work, 23 hours every 24 hours. Okay, but if we had our time again, I think we would certainly secure more medical personnel and volunteers just to take some of the pressure off, because, as I said, everything takes a little more time than we thought. Also, we actually used 3 hotels, 2 of which we had our own testing labs set up in them. And we tried to keep them as secure bubbles as much as we could, but it's very difficult to keep something locked down. And inevitably, there was some degree of kind of leakage in terms of people coming in and people leaving. And look, I don't think there were any major consequences as a result, but creating that really tight hotel COVID-free bubble is a real challenge. As I said, I think we did it pretty well, but we certainly didn't do it perfectly. And then finally, I think, and anyone who staged an event in recent weeks will be nodding furiously when I say this, the costs are hugely increased by having to stage an event against the backdrop of COVID-19, and the income is reduced at the same time. So, event budgets are put under real pressure. But look, we did it. We got through our challenges. We delivered a successful event, both men's and women's half marathon championships going without incident. I guess the only disappointment is, whilst we could create this COVID-free bubble to allow the athletes to compete, sadly, we weren't allowed to have any spectators lining the route, which of course does impact the atmosphere, but it was just impossible to test and create an environment for thousands and thousands of people. But we could certainly do it for a few hundred people. So look, hopefully that gives you an idea of what we did and how we managed to make Gdynia happen. I'll just pause now before we take any questions, because we do have a brief video, sort of 2-minute long video, that hopefully brings to life some of the protocols that I just talked about. So let's now move on to the video.
First time we do it for such a big event like the World Championships, and we have tested this before in single day event like a Diamond League meeting, and it went pretty well, but we didn't have such a big amount of athletes, so I think now we are about to test this. All starts at the airport at the welcome desk, where teams will be given a welcome bag with masks and gel. They will be transported from the airport to the hotel in dedicated buses. As soon as they enter, they will leave their belongings there, and they will have to go to this large room with a waiting room before the COVID-19 testing. technology called LAMP, L-A-M-P technology, which is analysis of genetic material, which is some kind of PCR testing, but that gives a faster result. So we are able to get the result in less than 1 hour.
Very good. Hopefully that brought some of what I was speaking about to life a little bit. So look, we're very proud of the fact we were able to stage the World Half Marathon Championships this year. It was not easy. And I think the main learnings for me, just in summary, is that you can only do this if you're working with an LOC that really, has a can-do attitude and accepts some level of risk. I think it's also vitally important to create a COVID-free bubble to provide the necessary confidence to make the event happen. And it's only possible if basically you're in charge of your own testing yourself, so you take back control of your own destiny. And thirdly, plan for the worst, because if you do get positives, you have to have the quarantine protocols and processes and locations set up in advance, so you can automatically move into kind of crisis mode and make sure everything is sorted rather than think, what do we do now? So look, thank you for the time. I'm joined by Stefan Beaumont, who's Director of Health and Science here. I'm just going to spin my screen around, so if there are any questions for either Stefan or myself, would be delighted to answer. So excuse the slightly less perfect framed picture now, but back to you.
Hi, John. Thank you for that. I'm sure I speak for everybody when I say how full of admiration we are for anyone who's managed to put on a physical event this year, particularly of that scale and complexity. So congratulations and well done, and fully appreciate the scale of the challenge there, which you've explained in as much detail as possible in the time available. And the sporting calendar has been sort of moved around a bit as a result of all of this, and you've got Oregon World Championships just around the corner, and you're doing the same thing again next year. So what does this mean for events that are happening next year? If you were to do it again, is there anything you would do differently? And what have you learned that you can take away to future championships?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. As John said, I think the first key learning was that the plan we draft on the paper works in real life, which is also always good news. Of course, we have to correct and upscale, because the next event to come next year will involve much more athletes and staff. But basically, we'll keep the same philosophy. There are some room for improvement. As John said, we need more staff from the healthcare perspective. Just for you to know, we're only 6 persons to deal with all this medical and COVID-19 related stuff, which seems to be a lot of person, but compared to the workload, including the analysis, that's not that much. Also, you need to keep in mind that when you speak about social distancing, you speak about flow management. And when you speak about flow management, you need large areas, a lot of surface in square meters. And this is also always something you should keep in mind when you choose your hotel or the places you want to run your event or your competition. This is extremely important. Something which is also challenging is that you also have to deal with the local regulation. And this local regulation in terms of public health, they may change from one day to the other. That's what happened to us, where John told you that we were in the red zone. So it means that some of our athletes who wanted to fly back home, they needed to take a PCR test, an extra one. Otherwise, they won't be able to fly back home. So this is also something you have to anticipate. And this is a key learning for future event.
I mean, our view is that the first half of next year is still going to be a compromised year. So, look, we certainly hope by this time next year the world is back to relative normality. But one of the reasons why it was so important to deliver Gdynia was actually so, we learned from it, and we learned a huge amount, because actually next year, when we have to do similar protocols, we have to scale up to a different level of an event. So it was brilliant to get that under our belt. We learned lots. And then if we do need to, and I think sadly we might need to do a similar protocol in 2021, we're much more ready now.
The testing, the scale of the testing operation is quite something. And when you put it in the context of the sort of the staff that you had available, I think it'd be really interesting if you could just sort of explain to people how you can achieve that. What you need to do to enable testing to happen on that required level, because that seems to be what's missing, not just from sports events, but just in society at large this year. So any advice would be everyone will appreciate, I'm sure.
Yeah, we have used this LAMP technology, which is I would say quite cousin to PCR. So it's molecular testing, so it's quite reliable, almost as reliable as normal PCR. The good thing is that it's a point of care device, so you can carry this in the cases, and if you get proper training, even if you're not a doctor, if you have any kind of scientific background, I would say, or nurse or someone, you can run this test quite easily after a simple training of 1 day. So that then you become completely autonomous. So depending on the number of tests you plan to do, you have to scale and order or rent 1 or 2 or 3 devices. Of course, this has a cost. But this is the cost of some kind of freedom and independence to normal lab. You still need collaboration with regular lab, because you need confirmatory tests to comply with the local sanitary rules. But this was, as John said, a key game changer for us, to be able to administer our own test. And depending on the number of devices you have, you can test up to 100, 200% per hour. You also need some people to collect the sample. And my advice would be, do this with professional and do some contract with local lab that can provide you with the proper personnel to do this sampling, this collection of sample.
Yeah. Speaking of contracts, there's a question come in about suppliers, about how the suppliers of services to the games, the championships, were managed. From Martin Fitchy, he's asking, were all the suppliers managed under the World Athletics system, or were they handled differently? I'm not sure if you're able to answer that question, John, perhaps.
As John said, everyone had to go through the protocol we designed. There were no exception, whether you're a broadcaster, a journalist, or a member official. But still, of course, as you know, some subcontractors, they have their own COVID-19 policy and insurance, so we respect that, but still they had to comply with our own sanitary protocol. Yeah.
And you have to keep the line on that. I remember a senior representative from one of the major sports apparel companies came to the hotel and bumped into me outside the hotel and said, "Well, can I come in? I've got some shoes for my athletes," and they weren't part of the system. So we said, "No, sorry, you can't come in." So there are people trying to come into the bubble the entire time. So you have to set it up, and you have to be true to it, no matter how harsh you sound at the time, because it's challenging.
Yeah, and it's just yet another thing that COVID has put under the spotlight, isn't it? Controlling your supply chain. We have 2 more questions, actually. So, in less than 3 months, this is from Andrew McMenamin. In less than 3 months, European Athletics is scheduled to hold the European Athletics Indoor Championships, also in Poland. Are you sharing your learning with European Athletics?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
We are doing that, and also the Polish Federation, and the government there, has this can-do attitude where they're worked really well with us. Obviously will not be reckless, but they want to see sport back on the agenda. So they're a great host country to work with as well. So I think European Athletics should be highly confident they'll make that event happen.
Thanks for that. We've got a question here about the verification of test results. This is from Lucy Crickmore. She asks, you mentioned that you had very clear protocols in place regarding athletes having to arrive with a negative test result. Did these results have to be corroborated by the national federations? And how did you get past challenges linked to checking certificates written in many different languages? Sounds complex.
That's a good question. I don't think, to some extent, that was sometimes managed by member federations. Sometimes that was directly managed by the athletes themselves or all other client groups, because keep in mind that we're not speaking only about athletes and officials. There is always the risk that someone is bringing you a forged document. We checked every single document. Of course, sometimes it was quite difficult because they were not in English or French. I think we managed to do that. Again, you have to understand that you cannot bring the risk to zero level. This is just a screening, an additional filter you put before people travel to Poland or to the destination. And that's the reason why you need to organize your own test once on site.
You mentioned the increased costs, John. Of course, this is something that we're all grappling with to some extent, is costs going up and revenues going down, sadly, which is not easy from a business management point of view. What's your sort of view on how to cope with that, and how long can you cope with that? Do you sort of see the COVID trajectory sort of easing in time for your cash flow to keep up?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question. And the view that certainly I've always had is we can all just about get through 2020, except you're going to have to, make losses on events, except you're going to have to overinvest to make things happen. But it's important to get things back on track. I don't think the world of sport can go through another year like this and remain solvent largely. And that's why I guess the vaccination is so important, that look, I think we've got a head around the fact the first half of 2021 is going to be compromised. But we're working to the assumption that from, sort of midsummer onwards, that the world of sporting events gets back to normal. Now, I hope I'm not proven naive in that statement, but it will be very, very challenging if we have another year like this, because revenues have gone down considerably and costs have gone up, and you can't do that forever. So I think hopefully the vaccination has come just in time, and 2021 will get back to normal. Otherwise, in many ways, I think 2021 could prove a more challenging year than 2020. But I remain optimistic.
Yes, yeah, I think we all have to. And I think from what we've heard over the last day and a half is that there are reasons to be optimistic, and also reasons to be cautious and realistic. And we've got into one last question. I realise we're running over time, so I do apologise for the panel that's waiting, but this is an important question. It's from Jose Gigante. Did you have any athlete, visitor or official with disabilities, vulnerable or high risk, for example? Any learnings or suggestions for parasports events or events with fans with disabilities? Thank you.
No, we did not, but we sent some clear in the stage 0 that John described. We were very clear on the fact that if you send some staff or people there, you have to make sure that, and that's also, you have to make sure that they are rather healthy, I would say. And that was also the justification for the medical consultation to be done before. It's not only making sure you don't have symptoms, it's also to inform the patient or the person or the athlete that if she or he carries a chronic medical condition that could be aggravating a COVID-19 infection, maybe he should not travel. But we don't have direct experience with disabled athletes, because that was not the purpose of this race.
Thank you very much to you both. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, John. And of course, you're right, safety first. But great to hear that you're keeping the show on, and let's hope for even more fantastic events coming in the pipeline.